In the first stanza of the poem Easter 1916, the poet starts with a kind of confession where he talks about how he met them in casual evenings, and he remembers that they had vivid faces. These people coming off from their work, returning home, either from their counters or desks as accountants or clerks, but they were, even though they were ordinary people, they had vivid faces. And the vividness of their faces is contrasted with the grey 18th century houses. So, the background of the first stanza shows that the streets and the villages he mentions are untouched by industrialization, and the people he refers to are very much ordinary. Again, the poet continues that he has seen them pass by and he has certainly nodded his head or uttered some polite, meaningless words like good morning, how are you, etc. And after exchanging such pleasantries, he had just walked away. Probably in some nightclub meetings or in sub club discussions, he must have even mocked at those people, sharing a casual joke about these people to a companion to please him. But in all those moments of fun and frivolity, the poet says that he and his companions were certain that the time that they lived was a time where motley was born, meaning their lives had been just the comedy of a gesture. So you can see the cynical attitude, the sarcastic attitude that Yeats has to the life of that particular time. But with a very clever declaration, he says that everything changed utterly, because a terrible beauty was born. So, in that oxymoron of a terrible beauty being born, the poet refers to how this ordinariness, fun, and frivolity of life changed utterly. So, the significance of these two lines is that something glorious yet terrible happened, which has changed the lives of all those people, including the poet himself. Now we know what is the terrible beauty that he is referring to: the Easter uprising of 1916 and the subsequent trial and execution of the rebel leaders. Now, the rebel leaders, as we see from the first stanza, were all common people, ordinary people. But why the poet confesses with a sort of a guilt in his mind that he had never had shown any sort of significance or attached any importance to them in his mind is because he considered them very ordinary people. The sense of indifference that he had shown to them is currently changed, because all those ordinary people had an extraordinary spark or fire in them, that nationalistic fervor with which the terrible beauty is born. And this is the impact these ordinary people has made in every Irish person's lives, including the poets. Now, the second stanza is quite a long one, which enlists these ordinary people one by one. In the first 7 lines of the second stanza, the poet refers to that woman. The woman here is Countess Markiewicz, who he says that she spent her days in ignorant goodwill, because a young woman usually spends time and her voice and her youth in many more creative things. And in contrast with the usual ways in which a beautiful woman, uses her youth, here he contrasts that with the attitude of Countess Markievicz. She is referred to as a political leader whose nights were spent in political arguments and discussions until her voice grew shrill. So she is referred to as a person with a sweet voice, but as a young and beautiful person, she is mentioned to have driving herself to harriers. Now, harrier is the hound of a huntsman, the hunting dog of a huntsman. Now, Countess Markievicz, as a beautiful young woman, is considered by the poet as somebody who chose voluntarily to be hunted by the British army, and eventually she had to sacrifice her own life. Who would have imagined that a beautiful young woman would have spent her prime youth, her beauty, and her sweet voice for a nationalistic cause? So, this is one such person who has impacted his mind after the Easter uprising of 1916. Countess Markievicz, as a young, beautiful woman who chose to lay her life for her fellow Irishmen, while people like the poet himself were enjoying the club discussions and drinks and a merry life. Now, in the same stanza, the second reference is to a schoolmaster, that is Patrick Pearse, who himself was a poet. Now, this man had kept a school, and that line refers to Patrick Pearse as a schoolmaster. And we know that this man was a poet because the poet mentions that he rode our winged horse. Winged horse is Pegasus, the horse of the muses. So Patrick Pearse was a poet and a schoolmaster, and that is the mention here in the two lines. Next to Countess Markievicz, the mention is to Patrick Pearse, an ordinary schoolmaster. The next 5 lines mentions his helper and friend, and the reference here is to Thomas Macdonagh, a poet, dramatist, and critic. So he is mentioned that he was just coming into force. He was just beginning to be a popular poet and dramatist, but if he had ever lived a life, he would have certainly won fame in the end. But sadly, he was killed in the Easter uprising of 1916. There are some adjectives given to him, that his nature was so sensitive and his thoughts were daring and sweet. So the sensitive nature of this man shows the way his poetic and humane nature was sensitive to the issues happening around him, and the sweetness and daring in his thought refers to the risk that he undertook in his life, that is, the willingness to lay his life for his fellow men. So we can see that all these people, Countess Markievicz, Patrick Pearse, Thomas Macdonagh, all these people were ordinary people. They did not have much of a great political history to boast of. And now there is a reference to Major John McBride. Now, Major John McBride was the person who married Yeats's beloved Maud Gonne. So, Major John McBride is not treated very pleasantly by Yeats because he is the villain who married Yeats's own lady love Maud Gonne. So, naturally, the reference to Major John McBride here is given in line number 32 as a drunken, vainglorious lout. Okay, a drunken, vainglorious lout is the reference or adjectives given to Major John McBride. Now, why does the poet call him drunken, vainglorious loved because he had done the most bitter wrong to the poet, because he married someone who was very dear to him. Yet, even Major John McBride, a villain in his own life, Yeats counts him too in this list as a very significant person, because unlike the poet, even he has done his own part in the casual comedy. We can see that John McBride was an awkward person, but he was a very proud person, which is why he is called as a vainglorious lout. So he is a sort of a fool. But suddenly, with his appearance in the rebellion, his ordinariness is changed to that of a hero. He is regarded as a hero right here. So the poet includes even him because he also has taken part in this casual comedy, because he too has changed his turn, his guise from an ordinary man to an extraordinary hero, transformed utterly. Even he transformed utterly through and through. And from then, you can see that a terrible beauty was born. Again, the oxymoron, a terrible beauty is born, repeats in the last line of the second stanza. So, in the second stanza, we can see that it provides a list of various people who were in the forefront of the rebellion of 1916, and the ordinariness of these people makes them special and worthy enough to be called as national heroes, because their participation shows that patriotic fervor can be uh, found in the most ordinary people. You can see that that terrible beauty takes form in the most ordinary people. The transformation of insignificant people into significant people. Something that even he couldn't have dreamt of